Good afternoon. You're listening to Gambling with an Edge. Now here are your hosts, Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. I'm Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Our guest today is bridge player and business executive Bob Hamman. Bob Hamman, welcome to Gambling with an Edge.
Thank you.
You're primarily known as an extremely successful bridge player, one of the very best in the world for decades. But you weren't always a world champion. When did you get started playing bridge, and how did you get to be one of the best in the world?
Well, a combination of having ability for games of this nature and being in the right place at the right time.
What does that mean? You were in the right place at the
Well,
right
for
time?
example, when I started playing bridge, I was in Los Angeles, and there were a number of highly skilled bridge players to play against and with, which it's very hard if you were in, say, a small town and pick a state where there isn't good competition. It's hard to get much better than the competition you're playing against.
Okay. And this was the early 60s?
My first hand of bridge was in June of 1957.
Uh-huh. Very good. Now, for many years, the Italian blue team won major international competitions, and accusations of cheating followed this team right and left. Whether it was by table foot tapping, under the table foot tapping, smoke signals from cigarettes, and there were other accusations as well. At the beginning of your international career, you competed against and mainly lost to the Italians during the time period in which they were accused of cheating. Do you have any stories about this?
Well, yeah, I mean, effectively, in my opinion, the blue team was cheating. They had two world-class players, absolute top level, a third player who was a top expert, and essentially three guys from central casting. That's not how you win world championships.
So you played against them and lost. What were the repercussions of that once the cheating was determined?
Essentially none. In 1975, well, the history of the blue team goes back to 1957, where they started winning world championships. And from 1957 through 1975, the blue team competed intact or roughly intact 17 times. 2 years they took out. They won 16 out of 70. That's impossible with the cast of characters they had.
Okay. One of your partners during that time period was Bobby Wolff. At one time, you were quoted as saying, "We win because we hate our opponent slightly more than we hate each other." Was that intended to be a lighthearted joke, or did you and Bobby not get along so well?
No, we got along pretty well. In fact, we got along quite well. That was just an off-the-cuff attempt at being funny.
I want to jump back for a moment. You mentioned at the beginning when you started that you had an affinity for these types of games. Were there other games that you were playing? And bridge is not really known for its gambling. I mean, there is some gambling at bridge, but it's not like other games. Were there other games that you were playing that you were making money at?
I wasn't making money. I was a pretty good chess player at one stage.
Yeah, no money in, probably less money in chess than bridge, which is saying something.
Well, actually, the chess players are getting pretty high paid these days.
Yeah, these days, but yeah, when I was younger, the chess players I knew were sleeping in their cars going to
Well,
tournaments.
a lot depends on the car.
Yeah.
I don't know. Even if you're really rich, sleeping in a Ferrari doesn't sound very comfortable to me.
No, you need a slightly bigger accommodations.
So, Billy Eisenberg, Paul Soloway, Bobby Wolff were three of your best known partners over the years, but you also won several times with other partners. How much more difficult is it to win major tournaments with someone other than a longtime partner?
Well, again, the nature of the game is such that you can get pretty well prepared by reaching an understanding on the methods you're going to play. So if you play well, and that's a caveat, obviously, a long term partner helps a bit because you can't cover all the necessary ground, but with a little bit of luck and playing well, you have a puncher's chance. So that, and sometimes better than a puncher's chance because you're not stale uh, and you haven't. I'd say the partners. Certainly, I had a good run with Zia Mahmood for a couple of years, and I played well numerous partners.
So, you're now in your mid 80s. My bridge playing friends tell me you're still playing at an extremely high level. How are you able to maintain mental alertness at that age?
Uh, I'd say my health has been good. My energy level is good, and I don't do the stupid things that are one is capable of. For instance, if you stay up half the night drinking before a session or eat big meals between sessions, that's not a recipe for success.
How many tournaments a year are you playing now?
Well, I was playing before COVID hit, and I had a bout with it. But in addition, a lot of tournaments were canceled, so uh, they've resumed play. And the objective is to play three national tournaments a year, an occasional regional tournament, which I don't put much stock in. That's playing in regionals is sort of like trying to strike out the pitcher. Of course, as the pitcher is Otani, it changes the equation a little bit.
Now, a player of your stature can make a substantial amount of money hiring himself out as a bridge player for some big tournaments. Is that something you have done or considered doing?
I have, but I'll pay handsome commissions if you can arrange the deal. Ah,
Yeah, I hear Warren Buffett and Bill Gates both are looking for a good partner. They might have some deep pockets.
I don't know. I think they're on the shorts. Actually, I've played with both Gates and Buffett, and to date, I haven't been paid for the deal.
Oh
They
dear,
haven't
when is
gone
this
so far
lawsuit
as to
going
suggest that I pay.
to? Well, I suggest you're not going to do that either. So, the Dallas Aces. You were a key member of that team, the world's first professional bridge team. Tell us about that.
Well, it was the world's first full-time professional bridge team.
Okay.
So effectively, Ira Korn got the idea in the mid 60s. And in the summer of 1967, uh, he did approach myself and Edwin Cantor to join the team. Now, Cantor at the time was living the good life in California, teaching bridge, etc. And he wasn't too enthralled with moving to Texas. Besides, he couldn't watch the Lakers play. So he opted out, and I didn't think it'd work, so I opted out. Later, it became clear to me when they played a couple of exhibition matches against us in the international team trials that they were getting better fast. This was largely due to their coach and general manager, Joe Musamichi, who was a retired Air Force colonel, and he did a pretty good job of keeping the troops in line.
And so
So
because you
eventually you
saw
joined
they
it.
were
I'm sorry.
because you saw they were improving rapidly, you decided to
I
join?
basically that summer they came to Los Angeles to play an exhibition match. They were very unimpressive. That fall, I played against them in the international team trials, and everything was different. They were very tough, and that I said, "This is working. I better try to get back on the train."
So you joined the team. Ira Korn. Was this a full-time job that he paid you to study and play and compete all the time, or were you allowed to do other things too?
I was allowed to do other things, and I stayed in the insurance business, not the prize business, but I had been recruited into a fellow who played bridge against me on Thursday nights for modest stakes suggested that I should go to work for a living because the way I played bridge, I'd starve to death, despite visual evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, well, there has been a bit of evidence to the contrary. You can match your lifetime career wins against anybody. Um, Now you played bridge at the highest level for about 60 years. Do you still study the game
Absolutely. I think about the game.
and
It's,
talk hands with partners and anybody basically?
well, with partners mainly and teammates. I mean, they want to know why they're wrong.
Uh, is that how they would phrase it?
Perhaps not.
All right. During the pandemic, there was a lot of online bridge where players could compete against others in different cities, even different time zones. It's also much easier to cheat online, where you can exchange information with your partners out of sight and hearing of your opponents. Defenders can know 26 cards before the opening lead, and one card later, they can know all 52. Many players were caught cheating during this time period. Were you surprised at all the cheating that happened then? And what kind of punishment for that do you think is appropriate?
Well, I'm not in favor of lifetime punishment, but I think pretty significant punishment is appropriate, that they should be suspended for a period of time. And they, effectively, that's strike two. They better not have another one.
So suspend them for
I don't
some
know.
time, but then give them a second chance.
I would give them a second chance.
And if they get caught again, that's it? Or is it two strikes you're out or three strikes you're out?
I'd say that would be strike three as far as I'm concerned.
All right. We are going to take a brief commercial break, and then we're going to come back and talk to you about SCA, your company that insures strange things.
Sometimes very strange things.
All right, we're going to talk about that. The South Point has more than 10,000 games returning at least 99%. This is more such games than anyone else has. To celebrate the upcoming South Point 400 NASCAR event, the September promotion is earning City Lights Moonshine. You can earn up to 3 bottles weekly, Sunday through Saturday, excluding the days of September 18th to 20th, by earning 1,200 points on video poker or slots. You keep the points. There's a different mix of moonshine flavors this year than they had previously. Now you can choose among bar candy, key lime, lychee, orange, original, and plum. On Labor Day, from 7 a.m. through midnight, they will have a hot seat promotion where $100 winners are drawn every 2 minutes on average. This is a bigger promotion than they usually have in their hot seat. Usually it's every 3 minutes rather than 2, and usually it begins at 8 a.m. rather than 7 a.m.
If you're serious about card counting, the Blackjack Apprenticeship membership is a great way to learn, train, network, and get the resources you need to succeed. We've had quite a few guests on Gambling with an Edge who exclusively trained and got their start through Blackjack Apprenticeship. Check out the website at blackjackapprenticeship.com. They have member forums, training software, and guides to help you learn. That's blackjackapprenticeship.com, and you will find a link in the show notes.
Videopoker.com is the best place to play lots of games. If you sign up for the gold membership, $8.95 a month or $79.95 a year, this allows you to get correction on most of the games. The game of the week is Wheel Poker Deluxe. This is a game where you pay an extra 5 coins per game, meaning triple play costs 20 coins, 5 play costs 30, and 10 play costs 55. And the bonuses come on dealt trips, full houses, and 4 of a kinds. Slightly different dealt hands and deuces wild variations. If you get one of these bonuses, you spin the wheel. When the wheel spins, it lands on a drawing opportunity. Sometimes it's 100 play, 4 to a flush. Sometimes it's 10 play with a pair of aces. Sometimes it's triple play, 4 to the royal, etc. There is no skill involved in the hold for the bonus, and the bonus is earned on the draw, meaning that if you know the strategy for the base game, you know the strategy for the Wheel Poker Deluxe version, which adds a bit of expected value and a lot of variance. Surprisingly, the triple play version always pays a bit more than the 5 play version. For example, in 9-6 double-double bonus, the base game returns 98.98%. The 5 play version of Wheel Poker Deluxe pays 99.31%, and the triple play pays 99.47%. All right, we're back talking with Bob Hamman, and we're going to get away from his bridge playing exploits and talk about SCA. Now, this is a company you formed in 1985 that insures one-of-a-kind situations, like maybe $50,000 bonus if somebody gets a hole-in-one on a particular hole during a golf tournament. Now, that company grew into insuring casino and other promotions, such as rolling the same number of big dice 3 times in a row for a big prize. All kinds of different promotions. One of your top lieutenants, Norman Beck, was a guest on this show back in April of this year. He told us about having to sleep with a bull to prevent anybody from doing anything to tamper with the health of that animal. He talked about throwing olives into a martini glass. He talked about using a where a bull poops as a random number generator. But he didn't tell us about Lance Armstrong. Now, you've had a couple of run-ins with Lance Armstrong. Can you tell us about that?
Well, we took the risk for him winning 3 Tour de France's in a row, which he did, 4 Tour de France's in a row, which he did, and 5 Tour de France's in a row, which he did. And of course, there were a number of, there was a book published called LA Confidential with the French spelling. It was published in France by David Walsh and Pierre Ballester, which went into great detail about, let's say, added edges that Lance may have possessed. And as a result of that, we got into a long-running dispute, which ended up with us getting a sizable fraction of the money we distributed back, aided somewhat by his confession on national TV.
Yeah, that would help. What was
Right.
the actual promotion that would trigger the payout?
Well, it was geared to an incentive bonus, which was ostensibly offered by the U.S. Postal Service, which was one of his sponsors.
Oh,
Turns
so
out it
it
was
would
it turns
specifically.
out it was Lance betting on himself, but that was another deal that we weren't aware of.
I see.
So the first time you went to court with Lance, he won.
Well,
But
it was
this
in an arbitration, and
first time you went to arbitration, he won. And then, of course, later when he confessed on TV, you took him to court. And there
we
you
went back to
reached,
the same arbitrators.
again, arbitration. And as near as I can tell, it was you reached a financial settlement that was agreeable to all parties and nobody can talk about the amount. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I think we can. Um, it was the whole thing all in cost us about 12, 13 million by the time the smoke settles, and by the time and our recovery net was about 8.5 million. So it
So
was
you still took us a loss, but you got most of it back.
well, it had a lot of negative repercussions for us because we were. It actually cost us a fair amount of business and the time and reputational damage
Really, that surprises me. I mean, that you would
during the
take the hit.
time he was succeeding.
Huh. So, how did SCA start? What
Bad
gave you
luck.
the idea?
Well, I was in the insurance business, which I had stayed in while I was with the Aces. I had a wholesale life insurance agency, and a customer of ours who was buying group insurance said, I do some hole in one coverage, and I also get all sorts of inquiries for other things. And can you help me arrange for some capacity for it? And I said, I think I can. And we agreed on something. We didn't stay in business for very long, but I had seen enough of the business. I liked it. So I stayed in it. I mean, among the things we've done is the challenge was to grow 1,000-pound pumpkin by Halloween. They grew it. Our staff ate pumpkin pie for 6 months.
Uh,
Incidentally, the current record is above 2,000 pounds.
Wow.
That's a hell of a jack-o'-lantern.
it is. Now, briefly going back to Lance Armstrong, there was a 2015 movie that our listeners can rent if they want called The Promise about the rise and fall of Lance Armstrong. And the role of Bob Hamman was played by Dustin Hoffman. Uh, that must have been a hoot to be played by such a prominent actor.
That was, I never met Dustin. And I, at one point, wanted to talk to him to see what he had done to prepare himself for the role. I mean, for instance, did he take up bridge and chess? Never got an answer.
And you're a bigger man than Dustin is, so
Well, I probably outweigh him by a few pounds.
yeah, one or two. So did he eat a lot or wear a
I
lot of
don't think he did much of anything, but he did. He took the role, and so I've never been approached to play the part of Dustin Hoffman in the movie, so I guess he's one up on me.
well, maybe they can get you to do Rain Man. Okay, who knows? Now, every time you're talking about a new promotion, there has to be some kind of negotiation as to what the rules are, how much the price is, how much down payment in advance, how you're going to check to see that no cheating occurs, lots of things. Sometimes you end up getting the contract, sometimes you don't. Are any of these negotiations, were they particularly memorable?
Well, again, if we don't understand it, it's highly unlikely that, or if we don't think we understand it, let's clarify that a bit. Sometimes it turns out we didn't understand it, but we have to understand it. It has to be in an environment where the outcome is either extremely difficult to engineer or impossible to engineer. So that we have got to be able to quantify the odds and be at least reasonably confident that we have the best of it. We buy insurance for our own account from a number of prominent insurers, and they
So
most of the time trust us to have done our homework.
so when you say you buy insurance on your own account, do you mean you basically lay off some of the bet?
Well, yeah, we enter into a business contract. We are not an insurance company. It's a manufactured risk, and insurance generally deals with the fortuitous bad things happen.
Yeah, now
So
some
this is,
things are very easy to calculate, like cow pie bingo when there's 50 squares and you're betting on which one the cow is going to dump into. But when it's something really um, difficult to calculate, how do you set the premium? How do you put a price on something where there is no data to go off of?
well, sometimes there's analogy that you can base it on. Sometimes they're not, but basically, we have to understand the risk in order to take it. Otherwise, it's, uh, it's just guessing.
Now, among gamblers, one of the mathematical laws about how much risk they can take is called the Kelly criterion, which would mean if you have an edge, you can bet a certain percentage of your total wealth on one particular bet. Do you use the Kelly criterion in particular to help you?
Well, we are familiar with it and understand the criterion. It's a case of how much variance can you afford to undertake, but some of our risk counterparties that we deal with have very deep pockets, and they can take quite a bit of variance, but they have to understand the proposition they're getting into.
So, one of the very famous ones was something with a Pepsi bottle cap that if somebody got, if correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't remember exactly how this worked. If somebody got the correct bottle cap, they won $1 billion. And I think Warren Buffett was one of the people bankrolling a big part of that. How exactly did that work?
Well, we put up a very substantial prize with Pepsi involved in it, which it was a nominal $1 billion, but it was paid out in an annuity format. Actually, the present value was 250 million at the time the event took place, and it was a simple number match in actual practice. So people qualified to take a chance at essentially guessing a number.
How big a number?
Well, the odds of it going were approximately 1 in 1,000.
Wow.
so it wasn't, and the present value was 250 million. So the expected value was $250,000.
Well, most people would think that's big enough to whet their appetite.
Well, most of the population is pretty risk averse,
Yeah.
and and that's probably a good thing.
How often do you turn down insuring a promotion because you consider it illegal, immoral, or perhaps in a gray area?
Well, again, we deal with licensed casinos. They're subject to whatever criteria, and there are promotion laws regarding chance promotions. So we're very cognizant of the legalities involved, but usually if somebody is not endangering themselves and don't have to pay to participate, there's a lot of leeway in offering the prize. So,
What's the most unusual thing that you ever insured?
well, I'd say proof of a body of water on Mars the size of the Arctic Ocean was that was an unusual one. Uh, we
Wait.
also did
The size of the Arctic Ocean.
yeah,
How would
and
you lose that? What would they have to do
Yeah,
they prove that there was a body of water on Mars the size of the Arctic Ocean.
so they'd have to fly to
Well, they'd have
Mars
to,
and take a swim? I
or
mean, what would they have to do to prove that?
have to produce scientific proof that it existed.
who would want
Another
to
thing,
insure that? I mean, who would want to?
first, if we're satisfied that it's not the case, it's not very hard to find a market for it. We also did one with an Elvis Alive contest. But again, that's a little tricky because you have to divine Elvis precisely. And we did, there's the ever popular proof of Bigfoot deal. Now, the Bigfoot industry has fallen under relatively tough times because there was a time, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago when you couldn't turn on the TV without getting a Bigfoot show. But, and there were two competing Bigfoot contests that year. One we called Little Bigfoot, which we got, and there was one big Bigfoot with a bigger prize. And there was a deadline for submitting proof. And one fellow, one of the things we did, which was fairly, well, I wouldn't say it was smart, that would be over dignifying it, but we had to A, define Bigfoot, and B, uh, and the sponsor was okay with that, have an arbitration panel decide if the proof was sufficient or not. And they accepted a panel where the chair of the panel was the editor in chief of Skeptic magazine. Now that's a good start.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, with about a week to go on the promotion, a fellow came back and said, I found a whole nest of big feet. Well, where would you imagine that he found them?
On a basketball team?
It was in the States. I'll give you a clue.
Well, it's got to be in a wilderness area of some sort. So probably it's in the Rockies if it's in the southern 48, or there's a lot of mountains in Alaska.
Well, this guy found them in Palm Desert, California. And
Well, that was third on my list.
a large hairy biped would not be found in a desert environment in the summer.
So what kind of proof did he bring?
They didn't bring much in the way of proof,
Oh,
but
But there have to have been other cases where um, people fraudulently tried to say that they won one of your promotions when they didn't, which would.
well, there was one guy who was a Russian who would go from, this was shooting basketballs. So he'd go from one venue to another, paying off the organized somebody on the organizers to get him selected to take the shots. And he was very good at it. So he made a few bucks on that. We didn't happen to be caught in that web, but it happens. There's the old W.C. Fields line that anything worth having is worth cheating for.
So is it usually arbitration if there's a dispute, or does it sometimes go to court?
Well, again, 99% of our business is done with publicly verifiable events. So as a result, we've been involved in very, very few court cases. There was a time when we got sued over a hockey shot contest, and there was a insert in the net that made for a much smaller target hole, and the rules was it had to go completely through the target hole and come to rest on the other side. The only problem was it didn't. So the nature of the complaint was that the puck wouldn't fit through the target hole. And if we established it was hit, he should be paid anyway. So ultimately, the jury found in their favor, but this was simply because the judge didn't want to dismiss the case. She assumed the jury would do her dirty work for her. But the jury, so when they came back with the verdict, she said time out and made it a directed verdict in favor of us. So you always run into that situation, but we have not been involved in that.
that's bizarre. I mean,
No, it's not. It's an elected judge,
yeah,
and they don't
no, but
want
I
to.
mean that the jury would. I mean, if being able to show that the puck would fit through the hole should be very simple. So how
Well,
a jury can say, you
one
know,
would think so. So, but
yeah,
this is
that's
America.
yeah,
Remember, you can get sued because it's Wednesday, even if it's Friday.
right.
And on the other hand, judges can be bought off, which I'm definitely not accusing anybody of anything. But
Well, in this case, there was no buying off of the judge. The
Yeah.
judge just was hoping that the jury would spare her the campaign against somebody who was against the little guy.
But it also is such a waste of the judge's time to have a whole trial.
Well, it wasn't a long trial, but it probably took 2 or 3 days.
do you ever get involved in ensuring political events of any sort, whether a particular candidate will or will not win, or a bill will or not pass?
That's sort of a third rail. So we stick away from that.
Keep doing what you're good at and stay away from what.
Well, keep doing what we think we're good at.
Now, have there been cases where you insured an event, lost, paid, and afterwards wondered if you'd been hustled?
Well, on rare occasion, but there usually isn't a heck of a lot you can do about it after the fact. other than spend more money chasing phantoms.
Now, on these events, whether something does or does not happen, like maybe shoot a basketball from center court by somebody picked from the audience, do you usually have one of your people in the audience that night to make sure everything's on the up and up, or you just kind of take their word for it?
Well, usually there's coverage of it and it's filmed, and you basically, it's not economical to send observers out for moderately priced events. So if you can't get by without an observer, perhaps you shouldn't be doing it.
But presumably videotaped evidence is not that expensive.
No, it's not. And remember, these are usually at a game. I mean, we wouldn't touch a high school game, for example, but a game between NBA teams, I think we can pretty well rely that if they say it happened, it did.
Does it? I have to say, the one thing about your business that baffles me is when casinos want insurance for things when they're supposed to be in the gambling business and understand, what the odds of things are. So, I mean,
Well, that's a very interesting situation because even though the entity may have the resources, for instance, Pepsi Cola on this $250 million risk had the resources to cover that. But the department in charge of it maybe didn't have the resources. So our markup is pretty cheap compared with the number of meetings they'd have to decide if it's worthwhile. And then if something goes wrong, the the search for a bag holder knows no limits.
sure. But for a casino to, want to insure $100,000 prize for a hole in one in a golf tournament just seems ludicrous to me.
Well, again, it's just the debating it and the departmental budget. So each department may have a budget of X and they don't want to blow it because of bad luck. So it seems on the surface, but certainly a very well capitalized company uh, will choose not to accept the risk themselves, just simply because you have to go through hours and hours of debate. Is this a good deal or a bad deal? And if something goes wrong, the finger pointing never stops.
Now, does it ever happen that a casino marketing department comes up to you and says, we want to do a really interesting promotion. This is our budget. But we don't know what we want to do. What do you got? And so
Well,
you give them 10 different options as to an interesting promotion you've run somewhere in the country in the past. Does that kind of conversation ever happen?
with high frequency, they're looking for ideas. That's part of what we get paid for.
Is to invent promotions.
Right.
Is it
And
ever,
some of them, quite frankly, have been pretty dumb ideas. But usually we come to our senses before we actually roll it out.
is there part of the negotiation sometimes is if we pay you to do this, you got to promise you won't do the same promotion for anybody else ever again. Is that ever part of the?
Well, ever again is quite a leeway, but we would certainly give them a period of time and a territory.
So you won't do it again in the Midwest in the next 2 years, something like
Well,
that.
it's a little bit long, but 6 months is probably doable. And the
Okay.
Midwest is a pretty big territory, but in the city seems reasonable. So basically, it's just a lot of these things are judgment calls, and someone will call up thinking they've invented a promotion, which we've done 832 times in the last 6 months. Well, pride of authorship also creeps into the equation.
Yes, and sometimes if they're paying a big enough premium, you'll give them a bigger territory over a longer time period.
Yes, everything gets to be negotiable.
So, Bob, you were saying you had something, interesting story to tell us.
Well, we're going back 60 some odd years, and the Los Angeles Bridge Club was busted by the LA County Sheriff's Department for gambling. Now, under California law at the time, you could wager on a game of skill, but not on a game of chance.
Yes.
So the question was bridge a game of skill or a game of chance? So one of my early partners, in fact, the guy I learned a lot about the game from, was the witness for the club. Case wound its way to the California Supreme Court, and the state's attorney got up and asked him to state his qualifications and then posed the question of was he an expert bridge player? And he responded that that's not quite accurate. And the attorney bit a little bit and said, well, what is accurate? He said, I'm the world's greatest bridge player. So, and he had a pretty good argument for that, but we'll go into that later. So his counsel took us aside and said, Louis, didn't you lay it on a little bit thick? I said, what could I do? I was under oath.
That's good. And there was cases in New York, I believe, as well, that bridge was considered a game of skill. So
Yeah, there have been cases, and of course the test really is certainly poker is a game of skill. Golf is more a game of chance than poker is, because you hit a ball one way or another that's off by an inch, and at 150 yards, then it rolls into the pond. If it's on one side and next to the hole, if it's on the other side of the crowd. And so there's a lot of luck. Obviously, skilled players need less luck, but on any given round of golf, there's some pretty wide swings over some pretty minor differences.
yes, and our audience knows about those swings in all kinds of different games. Back when I played backgammon in the 70s, there were T-shirts you could buy that says backgammon is a game of luck, and the luck was crossed out, and underneath it was the word skill, and that was crossed out, and underneath it was the word luck, and that was crossed out, and underneath it was the word skill, and it went down the whole shirt. Keep changing your mind whether it's luck or skill. So
Backgammon is a great game, incidentally, because the learning curve is not all that long, but the better players tend to put their pieces in the right positions and make much better cube decisions.
yes, they do.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that that backgammon is one of the things that makes backgammon so good is that you can teach two 6-year-old children how to play it in a very short amount of time, and they can play with each other and have a great time at their level, but it takes a lifetime to really master.
Well, and the knowledge as to what you should do has changed over the decades.
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, it's you
Yes,
backgammon. I think backgammon's a terrific game.
It's also a great one of the best gambling games because the losing
Absolutely,
player always thinks he got unlucky, and
yeah,
the better player is going to get the money.
but not always.
No, not always. There's enough variance to make
Whereas
the
if you're
worst
playing
player think
chess
he's
against somebody, it
yeah,
doesn't take very long. It's a bad game to bet on.
right.
Try running 100-meter dashes. After about two of them, you don't need to bother. Incidentally, we were involved in a promotion of a foot race once. It was between Michael Johnson, who at the time was the world record holder at 200 meters, and Donovan Bailey, who had won the Olympic 100-meter race in Atlanta. And they reached a compromise deal that they would run at 150 meters and around a bend. And it was in Toronto. So we were involved in promotion of this one. So now, I said they were running 150 meters. So it was a between distance. So they're out of the chute, they've rounded the bend, and Bailey's ahead. And there's no way in hell Johnson's going to catch it. So Johnson clutches his hamstring. And I don't know if he was hurt or he wasn't, but he didn't win the race.
Huh. And what did that do to the bet? Did that nullify the bet, or did that?
It wasn't a bet. We were just promoting it, and so part of the deal is we were a foot race promoter in addition to all the other endeavors that I've indulged in.
So if a person or a casino or a radio station wants to run a promotion and considering SCA, how would they get in touch with you?
Pick up the phone and call us. 214-860-3700.
All right. And if they can't find SCA promotions in
They
Dallas,
can probably find us online,
they're not smart enough to deal with anyway.
or we're not smart enough to be visible.
All right. So thank you, Bob Hamman.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
At the end of our show, we have a recommended section. So where the guests are the hosts, sometimes the guests recommend something. So Richard, do you have anything for our listeners today?
Yeah, my recommended this week is my favorite Italian restaurant in Las Vegas, and it's called the Sicilian, and it's on East Tropicana Avenue. So very good food, and yeah, so that's my recommended for this week.
All right. My recommended is about Patrick Veitch, spelled Veitch. He's a British horse player with an interesting story. He hasn't been interviewed many times, but there's a series of 5 interviews on YouTube that I recommend. While his accent made it tough on me to understand the first time I listened to it, when I went back, I got used to it. He's speaking specifically about betting on horses, but much of what he says applies to other forms of successful gambling as well. One interesting part of this series is he has a different take on the Monty Hall problem. Now, the Monty Hall problem has to do with 3 unopened doors, and you pick one, and the host knows what's behind him and opens up another door, etc. So most of you have heard about this. Most of you know the correct answer. But Patrick Veitch has an interesting take on it, which is different from what you know. So just that makes this an interesting series to watch, to listen to. All right. So thank you, Bob Hamman. Thank you, Richard Munchkin. Go out and hit lots of royal flushes, everybody. Good day.